What happens when the man you love becomes the monster you must escape and the father you can never outrun? Elena Carter thought she knew Victor Hale. She thought love could exist in the shadows of his world. But on a rain-soaked Los Angeles night, she witnessed the truth. A single nod, a man's life erased, and the chilling realization that the arms she'd trusted belonged to someone who could destroy her with the same casual precision. Now, 9 months pregnant and running on borrowed time, Elena has one final secret left to protect. But Victor Hale doesn't lose what belongs to him. And whether she knows it or not, she stopped belonging to herself the moment she fell in love with a monster. If you're ready for a story of love, lies, and impossible choices, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Oh, the rain came down like judgment. Elena Carter stood beneath the awning of a closed boutique on Sunset Boulevard, her fingers trembling as they clutched the small white stick that had changed everything. 2 pink lines, unmistakable, irrevocable, the kind of truth that rewrites your entire future in the span of a heartbeat. She'd taken the test 3 times. Each one screamed the same answer: pregnant. The word felt foreign in her mouth, terrifying and exhilarating all at once. For weeks she'd ignored the signs, the exhaustion that clung to her bones, the nausea that arrived like clockwork every morning, the strange tenderness in her breast that made even her softest blouse feel like sandpaper. She told herself it was stress, the long hours at the marketing firm, the late nights waiting for Victor to come home from whatever business kept him in the shadows until dawn. But deep down, she'd known. And tonight, she was going to tell him. Elena pulled her coat tighter against the October chill and checked her phone again. Victor's last text had come 20 minutes ago. Running late. Meet me at the usual spot. 10 minutes. The usual spot was a small Italian restaurant tucked away in a quiet corner of West Hollywood, the kind of place where the owner knew your name and the wine list was older than most of the patrons. It was where they'd had their first real date, where Victor had looked at her across candlelight and told her she was the only honest thing in his life. She'd believed him then. She wanted to believe him now. The rain intensified, drumming against the awning with increasing urgency. Elena stepped out into the downpour, her heels clicking against wet pavement as she made her way toward the restaurant. The pregnancy test was still in her purse, a tiny plastic oracle that felt heavier than anything she'd ever carried. She turned down an alley, a shortcut she'd taken a dozen times before, and that's when she saw him. Victor. He stood 50 feet away, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the glow of a distant streetlight. Even from this distance, she recognized the cut of his suit, the way he held himself with that particular brand of stillness that had always made her pulse quicken. Power. Control. The absolute certainty that the world would bend to his will. Relief flooded through her. She opened her mouth to call out to him, but something stopped her. Victor wasn't alone. 2 men flanked him, both dressed in dark clothing that seemed to drink in the shadows, and kneeling before them, hands bound behind his back, was a third man. Even through the rain, Elena could see the fear written across his face, the wide eyes, the trembling mouth, the desperate slant of his shoulders as he begged for something she couldn't hear. Her feet froze to the pavement. Victor said nothing. He didn't raise his voice, didn't gesture wildly or show any sign of anger. He simply looked down at the kneeling man with the kind of cold assessment you might give a broken appliance, then gave the smallest nod. It happened so fast that Elena almost didn't process it. One of Victor's men stepped forward and pressed a gun to the back of the kneeling man's head. There was no hesitation, no ceremony, just a single motion, efficient and practiced, followed by a sound that cut through the rain like a crack of thunder. The kneeling man collapsed forward into a puddle, his body twitching once before going completely still. Elena's purse slipped from her fingers. The sound of it hitting the wet concrete was small, insignificant, but in the terrible silence that followed the gunshot, it might as well have been an explosion. Victor's head snapped toward her. Their eyes met across the rain-soaked alley, and Elena saw something flicker in his expression: recognition, surprise, and beneath it all, something far more dangerous: calculation. She ran. Her heels skidded on the slick pavement as she turned and sprinted back the way she'd come, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Behind her, she heard voices, sharp, commanding, and the sound of footsteps echoing through the alley. "Elena!" Victor's voice cut through the rain, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The image of that man crumpling to the ground was burned into her retinas, playing on an endless loop every time she blinked. A single nod. That's all it had taken. One gesture, and a human life had been snuffed out like a candle. She burst onto Sunset Boulevard, her lungs screaming for air. A taxi was idling at the curb, its driver scrolling through his phone with the bored expression of someone waiting out the rain. Elena yanked open the back door and threw herself inside. "Drive!" she gasped. The driver looked up, startled. "Where to?" "Anywhere. Just drive, please." He must have seen something in her face. The wild terror, the trembling hands, because he didn't ask questions. He simply put the car in gear and pulled away from the curb, tires hissing on wet asphalt. Elena twisted in her seat, looking back through the rain-streaked window. Victor stood on the sidewalk now, his figure growing smaller as the taxi accelerated. He wasn't running after her, wasn't shouting. He just stood there, watching her disappear into the night with an expression she couldn't read. And somehow, that was worse than if he'd chased her. Boom. The taxi dropped her at a motel on the outskirts of downtown, the kind of place where the neon sign flickered more than it glowed and the night clerk didn't ask for ID. Elena paid in cash, one of the few smart decisions she'd made in the haze of panic, and locked herself in a room that smelled of cigarettes and industrial cleaner. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall, her mind replaying the scene in the alley over and over again. Victor. Her Victor. The man who brought her coffee in bed on Sunday mornings and listened to her talk about terrible clients with genuine interest. The man who'd kissed her forehead when she had the flu and held her through nightmares she couldn't remember come morning. That same man had just ordered someone's execution with all the emotion of swatting a fly. Her hands moved to her stomach, still flat, still concealing the impossible secret growing inside her. She was carrying the child of a murderer. The thought should have horrified her, and it did. But underneath the horror was something even more terrifying, a thread of doubt, thin and insidious, that whispered, "Did you ever really not know?" The late nights, the vague explanations, the way people seemed to step aside when Victor entered a room, their eyes sliding away from his with practiced deference. The phone calls he took in other rooms, his voice dropping to a murmur she couldn't quite make out. She told herself he was just a businessman. Real estate, he'd said. Import and export. Nothing glamorous, but profitable enough to afford the penthouse in Century City and the black card he'd given her for emergencies. But real estate developers didn't order executions in back alleys. Import-export didn't require armed bodyguards who never quite smiled. Elena curled onto her side, pulling her knees to her chest as tightly as her body would allow. The pregnancy test was still in her purse, abandoned somewhere in that alley, along with every naive illusion she'd ever held about the man she loved. Her phone buzzed. She didn't want to look, didn't want to see his name on the screen, but her hand moved of its own accord, pulling the device from her pocket. 15 missed calls, all from Victor, and a single text message. "We need to talk. I can explain everything. Please, Elena, don't run from me." She stared at the words until they blurred together. "Don't run from me." As if she had a choice. As if the image of that man dying in the rain wasn't carved into her soul. As if the tiny cluster of cells dividing in her womb didn't complicate everything beyond repair. Elena deleted the message and turned off her phone. Then she lay in the darkness of a cheap motel room and made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She would disappear. The first rule of running was to move fast and light. Elena left Los Angeles before dawn, taking only what she could carry in a single duffel bag. She withdrew as much cash as the ATM would allow, $800 that felt like both a fortune and nowhere near enough, and bought a bus ticket to San Francisco using a name that wasn't quite hers. The bus was half empty, filled with the kind of people who traveled at odd hours for reasons they didn't want to explain. Elena claimed a seat in the back and pressed her forehead against the cool window, watching the city lights give way to dark stretches of highway. Every mile took her farther from Victor, from the life she'd built, from the man she'd thought she knew. But with every mile, the reality of what she'd done began to sink in. She had no plan, no destination, no idea how to disappear in a world where everything left a digital footprint. Her credit cards were traceable. Her phone could be tracked. Even the bus ticket purchased with cash had required some form of identification. Victor had resources, money, people who answered to him without question. If he wanted to find her, he would. The thought made her stomach twist with a nausea that had nothing to do with pregnancy. In San Francisco, she lasted 3 days. She found a women's shelter that didn't ask too many questions and spent her nights lying awake on a narrow cot, listening to the sounds of other broken lives trying to reassemble themselves in the dark. During the day, she walked the streets, her eyes constantly scanning for any sign that she'd been followed. On the 4th morning, she saw him. Not Victor, but one of his men. The shorter one, with the scar that cut through his left eyebrow. He stood across the street from the shelter, seemingly absorbed in his phone, but Elena recognized the particular quality of his stillness, the way he was there without appearing to be there. She'd seen that same stance outside their building in Los Angeles, outside restaurants where she and Victor had dinner, outside the coffee shop where she met friends. Protection, Victor had called it. My world has edges that aren't always smooth, baby. I need to know you're safe. She'd thought it was romantic then, proof that he cared. Now she understood it for what it was. Surveillance. Elena didn't go back to the shelter. She walked to the Greyhound station and bought another ticket, this time to Portland. From Portland, she went to Seattle. From Seattle to a town in Idaho she'd never heard of before reading it on the departure board. She kept moving, kept changing direction, kept trying to lose herself in the vast anonymous sprawl of America. But everywhere she went, she felt the weight of being watched. It was never obvious. Never the same person twice, but there were always signs. A car that seemed to be on the same route as her bus, a figure in a coffee shop who paid for their drink but never drank it, a hotel clerk who looked at her just a beat too long. Maybe it was paranoia. Maybe the fear had burrowed so deep into her psyche that she was seeing threats in every shadow. Or maybe Victor was playing with her, letting her run just far enough to feel hope before reminding her that escape was an illusion. By the time Elena found herself in Montana, she was exhausted. Not just physically, though the pregnancy was beginning to show in the persistent nausea and bone-deep fatigue, but mentally, emotionally. The kind of tired that settled into your soul and made you wonder if it might be easier to just stop running. She was standing outside a diner in a town called Elkridge, population 2,847 according to the weathered sign, when she felt the first flutter. It was so faint she almost missed it, a sensation like bubbles rising, or the brush of butterfly wings against the inside of her abdomen. The baby. Her baby. Elena's hand moved to her stomach, and for the first time since that rain-soaked night in Los Angeles, she let herself feel something other than fear. This child, Victor's child, her child, was real, growing, depending on her for everything. She couldn't keep running forever. Eventually the money would run out. Eventually her body would demand rest. Eventually the baby would arrive, and she would need help she couldn't provide alone. Elena looked down the main street of Elkridge, taking in the quiet storefronts, the mountains rising in the distance, the kind of small-town simplicity that seemed to exist outside of time. This was it. This was where she would stop running. This was where she would hide. The diner was called Millie's, and the woman who ran it was exactly the kind of no-nonsense presence Elena needed in her life. Millie Thornton was 67 years old, with steel gray hair pulled back in a practical bun, and eyes that had seen enough of life not to be shocked by much of anything. She hired Elena on the spot, cash under the table, no questions asked, when Elena explained she needed work and had experience in customer service. "You pregnant?" Millie asked bluntly, her gaze dropping to Elena's midsection. Elena hesitated, then nodded. "The father coming around?" "No." Millie studied her for a long moment, then shrugged. "Tips are yours to keep. Show up on time, don't steal, and we'll get along fine. Can you start tomorrow?" Just like that, Elena Carter became Ellie Bennett, a woman with no past and no connections, working the morning shift at a diner in the middle of nowhere. The work was hard but honest. She poured coffee, took orders, learned to carry 3 plates at once without dropping them. The regulars were farmers and truckers, men and women who ate the same meals at the same times and tipped modestly but consistently. No one asked about her story. In a place like Elkridge, people understood that sometimes you came to the middle of nowhere because nowhere was exactly where you needed to be. Elena found a room above the hardware store, a single space with a hot plate, a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in, and a window that looked out over the mountains. It cost $200 a month, which left her enough to eat, save a little, and buy the occasional prenatal vitamin from the pharmacy. She avoided hospitals, avoided anything that would create a record. When the nausea became unbearable, she choked down ginger tea and saltines until it passed. When her back ached from standing all day, she soaked in a lukewarm bath and told herself it would get easier. It had to get easier, because the alternative, going back, asking for help, admitting she couldn't do this alone, meant returning to Victor's world. And that was the one thing she absolutely could not do. 3 months into her new life, Elena began to notice small things that didn't quite add up. The first was her rent. She'd paid Millie the $200 in cash like always, but when she checked her coffee can, the place where she kept her savings, there was an extra $100 bill folded neatly at the bottom. She asked Millie about it the next day. "Don't look at me," Millie said, shrugging as she wiped down the counter. "Maybe you miscounted." But Elena knew she hadn't miscounted. She knew exactly how much money she had, down to the dollar. Someone had left her cash. The second incident came a week later. Elena's ancient car, a rusted Honda Civic she'd bought for $800 from a farmer's widow, had been making a terrible grinding noise every time she shifted into third gear. She'd been saving up to take it to the mechanic, but when she went out to drive to work one morning, the noise was gone. She popped the hood and stared at the engine. Everything looked different, cleaner, like someone had gone through and replaced parts she couldn't even name. "Probably just worked itself out," the mechanic said when she asked about it later. Cars do that sometimes. But cars didn't fix themselves, and money didn't appear out of thin air. The third incident happened on a Tuesday, when Elena's shift ran long because another waitress called in sick. By the time she finished closing, it was past 10, and the walk back to her room felt longer than usual. She was half a block from the hardware store when she noticed the man. He stood beneath a streetlight, his hands in his pockets, his face angled away from her. But there was something in his posture, that particular brand of alertness, that made her skin prickle with recognition. Elena's hand moved to the small canister of pepper spray she'd started carrying in her apron pocket. The man didn't approach, didn't even look at her directly. But as she climbed the stairs to her room, she felt his eyes on her back, steady and unwavering. She locked the door, checked the window, pulled the curtain shut. When she looked outside an hour later, the street was empty. By her 5th month, Elena's pregnancy was impossible to hide. Her belly swelled beneath the loose apron she wore at the diner, and her feet ached constantly from the extra weight. Millie, ever practical, started giving her the easier tables and sent her home early when business was slow. "You need to see a doctor," Millie said one afternoon, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I don't care what you're running from, Ellie. That baby needs proper care." Elena wanted to argue, wanted to explain that seeing a doctor meant paperwork, records, questions she couldn't answer. But the truth was, she was terrified. She didn't know if what she was experiencing was normal, didn't know if the baby was growing properly, didn't know if the constant exhaustion and occasional cramping were signs of something wrong. Millie must have seen the fear in her face because her expression softened. "There's a doctor in town, old guy, semi-retired. He doesn't ask questions, and he still makes house calls. Let me see if he'll come by." 2 days later, Dr. Samuel Roth knocked on Elena's door. He was 73 years old, with a weathered face and hands that trembled slightly but moved with practiced certainty. He examined her with the brisk efficiency of someone who'd delivered more babies than he could count, checking her blood pressure, listening to the baby's heartbeat, measuring her belly. "Everything looks good," he said finally, packing up his instruments. "Baby's measuring right on schedule. Strong heartbeat. But you need vitamins, Ellie. Real ones, not the bargain bin stuff from the pharmacy. And you should think about where you're planning to have this child. The nearest hospital is 40 minutes away, and mountain roads in winter aren't something to gamble with." Elena nodded, her throat tight. "I will, thank you." Dr. Roth paused at the door, his hand on the knob. "I don't know your story, and I'm not asking, but whatever you're running from, make sure it's worth risking that child's safety. Sometimes the thing we're most afraid of isn't as dangerous as what happens when we run." He left before she could respond. Elena sat on her bed and placed both hands on her belly, feeling the baby shift and turn inside her. For the first time in months, she let herself imagine the future. Not the escape, not the fear, but the actual moment when this pregnancy would end and she'd be holding a tiny human who depended on her for everything. How was she supposed to do this alone? She had no family, no friends who knew where she was, no resources beyond her tips and the mysterious money that kept appearing in her life like breadcrumbs from an invisible benefactor. And that's when the pieces finally clicked into place. The rent money, the car repairs, the man on the street watching her building, the feeling of being followed that had never quite gone away, even here in the middle of nowhere. Victor. Victor hadn't lost her at all. He'd been letting her run, letting her hide, letting her think she was safe, all while keeping her on an invisible leash. The realization should have terrified her, should have sent her running again, deeper into the wilderness, farther from anything that could connect her to the life she'd left behind. But instead, what Elena felt was exhaustion. She was so tired of running, so tired of looking over her shoulder, so tired of pretending that she could outmaneuver a man with infinite resources and infinite patience. Victor knew where she was, had probably known from the beginning, and if he'd wanted to take her back by force, he could have done it months ago. So why hadn't he? What? The answer came on a frozen January morning when Elena was 7 months pregnant and the Montana winter had turned Elkridge into something from a postcard. She was walking back from the diner, her breath misting in the cold air, when she slipped on a patch of ice. Her feet went out from under her, and she had just enough time to think the baby before strong hands caught her. "Easy, I've got you." The voice was unfamiliar, but the grip was firm and steady. Elena looked up into the face of a man she'd never seen before. Dark hair, sharp features, expensive coat that had no business being in rural Montana. One of Victor's men. She knew it with absolute certainty. "I'm fine," she said, pulling away from his grip. "Thank you." He didn't let go immediately. His eyes scanned her face, dropped briefly to her pregnant belly, then returned to meet her gaze. "He wanted me to give you something," the man said quietly. "I don't want anything from him." "It's not a gift, it's information." He reached into his coat and pulled out a manila envelope. "The people looking for Victor? They've expanded their search. FBI, mostly. They're doing a full workup. Associates, properties, anyone connected to him. It's only a matter of time before your name comes up." Elena's heart stuttered. "What?" "Your real name. Elena Carter. Victor's girlfriend who disappeared the same night a federal witness was killed. They're going to start looking for you, and when they do, this town won't stay secret for long." He pressed the envelope into her hands. "There's a phone number inside. When you're ready to stop pretending you can do this alone, call it. He'll come. He'll protect you and the baby. That's all he wants." "That's not all he wants," Elena whispered. The man's expression didn't change. "Maybe not, but it's all that matters right now." He turned and walked away, disappearing around the corner before Elena could find her voice again. She stood in the middle of the frozen street, holding the envelope like it might explode. Inside was a phone number, a bank statement showing a trust account in her name with $400,000, and a single photograph. It was her. Taken from a distance, probably with a telephoto lens. She was walking out of Millie's diner, her hand resting on her pregnant belly, her face turned toward the mountains. On the back, in handwriting she recognized, were 3 words: "Stay safe, Elena." She crumpled the photo in her fist and walked back to her room, but she kept the phone number. The contractions started on a Tuesday. Elena was wiping down tables at the end of her shift when the first one hit, a tightening across her abdomen that made her gasp and grab the edge of the table for support. "Ellie?" Millie looked up from the register, her eyes sharp. "You okay?" "Fine," Elena managed. "Just Braxton Hicks. They've been happening for weeks." But this felt different, stronger, more purposeful. She finished her shift, drove home carefully, and told herself it was nothing. False labor. The baby wasn't due for another 3 weeks. First babies were always late. Everyone said so. By midnight, the contractions were coming every 20 minutes. By 2 in the morning, every 10. By 4, Elena was on her hands and knees on the bathroom floor, breathing through waves of pain that stole her breath and made her see stars. This wasn't false labor. This was happening. She reached for her phone with shaking hands and dialed the only number she had for Dr. Roth. It rang 5 times before his sleep-roughened voice answered. "Dr. Roth," she gasped. "It's Ellie, the baby. I think it's coming." "How far apart are the contractions?" 7 minutes, maybe 6. She heard rustling on the other end. "I'm on my way. Pack a bag. We need to get you to the hospital." "No hospital," Elena said automatically. "Ellie, please, can't you deliver here?" There was a long pause. When Dr. Roth spoke again, his voice was gentle but firm. "First babies can be unpredictable. If something goes wrong, I can't help you here. You need to be somewhere with equipment, with specialists. This isn't negotiable." Another contraction hit, and Elena bit back a scream. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." Dr. Roth arrived 20 minutes later, his medical bag in one hand and a calm competence that made Elena want to weep with relief. He helped her into his car, an old Subaru that smelled of pipe tobacco and antiseptic, and they started the 40-minute drive to the hospital. They made it 15 minutes before the storm hit. It came out of nowhere, the way storms sometimes did in the mountains. One moment, the sky was clear and star-filled. The next, snow was falling so thick and fast that the windshield wipers couldn't keep up. "It's okay," Dr. Roth said, his hand steady on the wheel. "We'll make it." But Elena could hear the uncertainty in his voice. The contractions were coming faster now, 4 minutes apart, then 3. Her water broke somewhere on a dark stretch of highway, soaking through her clothes and the car seat beneath her. "Doc," she gasped. "Something's wrong. It hurts. It hurts too much." Dr. Roth pulled over. The snow was falling so hard now that Elena couldn't see more than a few feet beyond the windshield. He climbed into the back seat with her, his hands moving quickly, checking, assessing. His face went very still. "What?" Elena demanded. "What is it?" "The baby's breech," he said quietly. "We need to get you to the hospital now." But they both knew that wasn't going to happen. The snow, the roads, the distance. Elena was going to have this baby in the back of a Subaru on a frozen Montana highway, and there was nothing either of them could do about it. She reached out and grabbed Dr. Roth's hand, squeezing until her knuckles went white. "Save the baby," she whispered. "If you have to choose, save the baby." Dr. Roth's eyes met hers, and she saw in them the weight of 40 years of medicine, of life and death decisions made in moments too brief to second guess. "I'm going to save you both," he said. And then the real pain began. Later, Elena wouldn't remember much of what happened next. She remembered pain. Unbelievable, all-consuming pain that made everything else fade to white noise. She remembered Dr. Roth's voice, calm and commanding, telling her to push, to breathe, to hold on just a little longer. She remembered the sound of another car pulling up behind them, a dark SUV that appeared out of the storm like an apparition. Doors opening, voices conferring, hands lifting her, carrying her. She remembered the stark white lights of a hospital she didn't remember entering, and the sensation of being cut open, of something essential being removed from her body. And then, cutting through all of it like a bell, she heard a sound that made her heart restart. A baby crying. Thin, reedy, absolutely furious at being thrust into the cold and the noise and the light. "It's a boy," someone said. "A little small, but fighting." Elena tried to speak, but her throat wouldn't cooperate. She tried to move, but her body felt like it belonged to someone else. And then, through the chaos and the drugs and the exhaustion, she heard a voice that didn't belong. "Let me see him." The room went very quiet. Elena forced her eyes open, fighting against the weight of whatever medications they'd given her. Victor stood at the foot of her bed. He looked exactly as she remembered, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than she'd made in the last 6 months. But there was something different about his face, something raw and unguarded that she'd never seen before. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the baby. A nurse, young, uncertain, brought the tiny bundle over, and Victor took him with a reverence that might have been touching under any other circumstances. The baby stopped crying. Victor's large hands cradled the impossibly small body, and for a long moment he just stared, taking in every detail, memorizing every feature, Then his eyes lifted and met Elena's, and in that gaze she saw the truth she'd been running from for 9 months. Victor hadn't been watching her out of cruelty. He'd been watching her because she was carrying the one thing in the world he would never let go. "Hello, Elena," he said softly. The baby made a small sound, and Victor's attention immediately shifted back to his son. Elena tried to speak, tried to demand answers, explanations, anything that would make sense of this impossible moment. But exhaustion pulled her under like a tide, and the last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Victor holding their child, his expression a complicated mix of triumph and something that might have been love. When she woke again, everything had changed, and there was no going back. Elena's eyes opened to soft light filtering through unfamiliar curtains. For a moment she couldn't place where she was. The ceiling was too high, the sheets too smooth against her skin. Then the pain registered, a deep, pulling ache across her abdomen that made her gasp, and everything came rushing back. The storm, the highway, Dr. Roth's strained face as he'd worked to save her and the baby in the back of that Subaru, the hospital lights, and Victor, standing at the foot of her bed, holding their son with hands that had ordered men's deaths. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. "Easy," the voice came from her left, and Elena turned her head to find a woman in scrubs sitting in a chair beside the bed. She was maybe 40, with kind eyes and the sort of calm competence that suggested she'd seen every kind of medical emergency and lived to tell about it. "You had a C-section. The incision needs time to heal." "Where's my baby?" Elena's voice came out hoarse, desperate. "He's in the NICU, breathing on his own, but they're monitoring him because he came early. 5 pounds, 3 ounces, small, but strong." The nurse stood and adjusted Elena's IV with practiced efficiency. "You can see him soon. The doctor wants to check your vitals first." "What hospital is this?" The nurse's expression flickered, just for a second, but Elena caught it. "You're at a private medical facility outside Missoula. You were transported here after the emergency delivery." Private facility. Not a hospital. Somewhere without records, without questions, without the kind of paper trail that could lead federal investigators to a woman who'd disappeared 9 months ago. Victor's doing all of it. Elena's hands moved to her stomach, feeling the bandages beneath the thin hospital gown. Her body felt hollow, foreign. For 9 months she'd carried this weight, this constant reminder of the impossible situation she'd created. And now that weight was gone, replaced by surgical tape and the phantom sensation of something missing. "I want to see him," she said. "Please." The nurse hesitated, then nodded. "Let me get you a wheelchair." 10 minutes later, Elena sat in a cushioned wheelchair being pushed through hallways that looked nothing like any hospital she'd ever seen. The walls were painted soft gray. Actual artwork hung in frames. The lighting was warm, almost residential. This wasn't a place that dealt with insurance companies and Medicare. This was a place where money bought discretion and comfort in equal measure. The NICU was small, only 4 incubators, all but one empty. The nurse wheeled Elena to the occupied one and stepped back. Inside the clear plastic dome lay the smallest human being Elena had ever seen. He was perfect. Dark hair, impossibly delicate fingers, a face that somehow managed to look both ancient and brand new. His eyes were closed, his tiny chest rising and falling with breaths that seemed too fragile to sustain life. Wires and tubes connected him to monitors that beeped softly, tracking every heartbeat, every breath. Elena's hand pressed against the incubator, her fingers splaying on the warm plastic. "Can I hold him?" "Not yet," the nurse said gently. "His temperature regulation isn't quite stable, but you can touch him through the ports." She showed Elena how to reach through the circular openings, how to rest her hand on that impossibly small body. The baby's skin was warm, softer than anything Elena had ever felt. When her finger brushed his palm, his tiny hand closed around it with surprising strength. The tears came then, hot and sudden. 9 months of running. 9 months of fear and isolation and pretending she could do this alone. And here was the truth, wrapped in 5 pounds of fragile humanity. She'd never been doing it alone. She'd been doing it for someone who couldn't speak, couldn't ask, couldn't do anything but grow and trust that she would keep him safe. "He doesn't have a name yet," the nurse said quietly. "The father said he was waiting for you to wake up." Elena's jaw tightened. Where is he? Mr. Hale is in the waiting area. Would you like me to— No. The word came out sharper than Elena intended. She took a breath, forcing herself to soften. No, not yet. I need a minute. The nurse nodded and stepped away, giving Elena privacy with the son she'd run across 4 states to protect. She stayed there for nearly an hour, her hand resting on the baby's chest, feeling each breath, each heartbeat. Memorizing the shape of his ears, the curve of his nose, the way his mouth moved in his sleep as if he was already learning how to demand what he needed from the world. This was Victor's child, the son of a man who'd murdered someone in a rain-soaked alley without a flicker of remorse. But he was also hers, made from her body, sustained by her blood, protected by choices that had cost her everything she'd built. I won't let him hurt you, she whispered to the sleeping baby. Whatever happens, whatever he wants, you come first, always. The baby's hand tightened around her finger, and Elena chose to believe he understood. When the nurse finally came to wheel her back to her room, Elena felt steady enough to ask the question she'd been avoiding. How long have I been here? 2 days. You lost a lot of blood during the delivery. We kept you sedated to let your body recover. 2 days. 48 hours during which Victor had been here, in this facility, with unrestricted access to their son. The thought made Elena's chest tighten with a fear that had nothing to do with her surgical incision. Back in her room, she found clothes laid out on the bed. Soft cotton pants, a loose shirt, a cardigan that looked expensive but comfortable. Not her clothes. Nothing she recognized, but clean and in her size, which meant someone had been paying attention. She changed slowly, wincing at every movement. The C-section incision pulled and burned, a constant reminder that her body had been opened and rearranged. When she finally managed to get dressed, she found herself staring at the door, working up the courage to face what waited on the other side. Victor was in the waiting area. She could keep hiding, could demand the nurse keep him away, could pretend that if she just refused to acknowledge him, this entire nightmare might somehow resolve itself. But she'd been hiding for 9 months, and it hadn't changed anything. Elena opened the door and walked into the hallway. The waiting area was at the end of the corridor, a space designed to look more like a living room than a hospital. Comfortable chairs, soft lighting, windows that looked out over pine forests stretching toward distant mountains. And sitting in one of those chairs, his elbows on his knees and his hands clasped in front of him, was Victor. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression cracked. Elena. He stood, and she saw the exhaustion etched into his face, dark circles under his eyes, a shadow of stubble on his jaw that suggested he hadn't left this facility since she'd arrived. His suit jacket was gone, his shirt sleeves rolled up, and there was a coffee stain on his collar that the Victor she'd known would never have tolerated. He looked like a man who'd been keeping vigil. You shouldn't be walking, he said, taking a step toward her. The doctor said, don't. Elena held up a hand and Victor stopped. Don't pretend you care about what the doctor said. Don't pretend any of this is about my well-being. His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. They stood there, 10 feet apart, the space between them filled with 9 months of fear and fury and unasked questions. How long have you known where I was? Elena asked. Victor's eyes didn't leave her face. Since San Francisco. The honesty of it was almost worse than a lie would have been. You let me run, she said. You let me think I was free. You let me live in that room above the hardware store, working in a diner, terrified every single day that you'd find me. And you knew the whole time. Yes. Why? Victor was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low, careful. Because you asked me to. Elena laughed, the sound harsh and broken. I didn't ask for anything. I ran. I disappeared. That's the opposite of asking. You ran because you were afraid of me. He said it simply, as if it was just a fact to be acknowledged. And I thought, if I gave you space, if I let you feel like you had control, maybe you'd realize I wasn't the monster you saw in that alley. You killed a man, Victor. I watched you do it. I know. That's all you have to say? I know? Victor's expression hardened. What do you want me to say, Elena? That I'm sorry? That it was a mistake? It wasn't. That man sold information to the feds that got 3 of my people killed. He knew what the consequences would be. Elena's hands clenched into fists. And that makes it okay? That makes you judge, jury, and executioner? In my world? Yes. He took a step closer, his eyes intense. You lived in my apartment for a year. You wore clothes I bought, ate food I provided, slept in a bed I paid for. And you never asked where the money came from, never questioned why I had security, never wondered why people looked at me the way they did. Because I trusted you, Elena shot back. Because I thought you were a good man. I never told you I was good, Victor said quietly. You decided that on your own. The truth of it hit like a physical blow. He was right. She'd built an entire fantasy around him, filling in the blanks of what she didn't know with the kind of man she wanted him to be. And when reality crashed through that fantasy, she'd run rather than face what she'd willfully ignored. But that didn't make what he'd done acceptable, didn't make it safe, didn't make it anything other than exactly what it was: murder. I can't be with someone who kills people, Elena said, her voice shaking. I can't raise a child in that world. You're already raising a child in that world, Victor said. The moment you got pregnant, the moment you decided to keep him, you tied yourself to me in a way you can't undo. I am his father. That's not going to change whether you stay or whether you run. Elena's vision blurred with tears. So what? You're going to force me to be with you? Lock me up? Make me pretend we're some kind of family? No. The word was firm, final. I'm going to protect you, both of you, and you're going to let me. Why would I ever agree to that? Victor pulled something from his pocket and held it out. A photograph, creased and worn as if it had been handled many times. Elena took it, her hands trembling. It showed her, walking down a street in Elkridge. But the angle was wrong, taken from too far away. And in the background, barely visible, was another figure, a man with a camera pointed in her direction. This was taken 3 weeks ago, Victor said, by a private investigator working for the FBI. They're building a case against me, and part of that case involves finding everyone connected to me. You, Elena. They're looking for you. Her blood ran cold. That's impossible. I've been careful. I didn't use my real name, didn't... Your fingerprints are on file from when you renewed your driver's license. Your face is in databases. You used your credit card to buy that bus ticket out of Los Angeles, and even though you switched to cash after that, they can track patterns. Places you stayed, routes you took. It's only a matter of time before they piece it together. So what? Elena's voice rose. Let them find me. I didn't do anything wrong. You witnessed a federal informant's execution and didn't report it. That makes you an accessory after the fact. And when they find you, they won't just ask questions. They'll use you to get to me. They'll put you in front of a grand jury, threaten you with obstruction charges. And if you don't give them what they want, they'll make your life a living hell. He took a step closer, his voice dropping. But more than that, the people I work with, the people who see me as a threat or an opportunity, they'll see you and our son as leverage. They'll see you as a way to hurt me, and they won't hesitate to use that. Elena's hand moved to her bandaged abdomen, a protective gesture she couldn't suppress. You're trying to scare me. I'm trying to make you understand. Victor's eyes burned with an intensity that made her breath catch. I let you run because I thought you needed to. I gave you space because I thought that's what you wanted. But the world doesn't care what you want, Elena. It doesn't care that you're trying to protect our son by staying away from me. All it sees is a woman alone, vulnerable, with a child who carries my blood. So what do you want from me? I want you to come home. The word hung in the air between them, weighted with implications Elena wasn't ready to unpack. Home, she repeated. You mean your home, your world, your prison. Victor's expression didn't change. I mean safety, security, a place where you and our son can live without fear. I'll never be safe in your world. You'll never be safe outside of it. Not anymore. He gestured to the photograph still clutched in her hand. That investigator? I made sure he disappeared before he could file his report. But there will be others. There are always others, and I can't protect you if you keep running from me. Elena stared at him, trying to find the man she'd fallen in love with in the stranger standing before her. But that man had never existed. He'd been a story she'd told herself, a comfortable fiction that let her ignore the truth. This was who Victor really was. A man who made problems disappear, a man who saw the world in terms of assets and threats, a man who would do whatever was necessary to protect what belonged to him. And she and their son? They belonged to him now, whether she liked it or not. "I need to think," she said finally. Victor nodded slowly. "Take all the time you need. But Elena?" He waited until she met his eyes. "Don't confuse thinking with planning another escape. There's nowhere you can go that I won't find you, and next time, I won't give you 9 months to figure that out." He turned and walked toward the exit, then paused at the door. "His name," Victor said without looking back. "What do you want to call him?" Elena's throat tightened. She'd thought about this during her pregnancy, lying awake in that room above the hardware store, imagining futures that now seemed impossibly naive. "Alexander," she said quietly. "After my grandfather." Victor was silent for a moment, then nodded. "Alexander Hale. It suits him." And then he was gone, leaving Elena alone with the weight of decisions she wasn't ready to make. She walked back to the NICU, her body aching with every step. Alexander, her son, their son, slept peacefully in his incubator, unaware of the complications his existence had created. The nurse from earlier looked up as Elena approached. "Can you tell me something?" Elena asked. "Honestly, if I tried to leave right now, what would happen?" The nurse's expression was carefully neutral. "You're recovering from major surgery. Leaving would be medically inadvisable." "That's not what I asked." The woman was quiet for a long moment. Then she said very softly, "There are men at every exit. They don't wear uniforms, but they're there. Mr. Hale has made it very clear that you and the baby are to be protected at all costs." Protected. The word Victor's people always used when they meant controlled. Elena looked down at Alexander, at the son she'd crossed 4 states to keep away from his father. She'd failed. After all the running, all the fear, all the desperate attempts to build a life beyond Victor's reach, she'd failed. And the worst part was that Victor had been right about one thing. She couldn't protect Alexander alone. Not from federal investigators, not from rival criminals, not from a world that would see a crime boss's infant son as nothing more than a bargaining chip. The nurse stepped away, giving Elena privacy. She reached through the incubator port and rested her hand on Alexander's chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I tried to give you something better than this, but I don't know how." Alexander stirred at the sound of her voice, his tiny hand opening and closing. Elena offered her finger, and he gripped it with that surprising strength newborns sometimes had. She stayed there until the light outside began to fade, until the nurse came to tell her visiting hours were over, until her body couldn't take standing anymore. Back in her room, she found dinner waiting on a tray. Real food, not hospital food. Grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, fresh bread. And beside it, a small card in Victor's handwriting. "You need your strength, eat." Elena stared at the food for a long time before finally picking up the fork. She ate because he was right, because she needed to heal, because Alexander would need her, and she couldn't help him if she let herself waste away. But with every bite, she felt the walls of her invisible cage closing in. The days that followed developed a rhythm that felt almost normal, if you ignored the armed men in the hallways and the fact that every door required a keycard she didn't possess. Elena's body healed slowly. The incision closed, the pain faded to a dull ache, and eventually she could walk without wincing. Alexander grew stronger too. His weight climbed, his breathing stabilized, and on the 5th day, the doctors finally allowed Elena to hold him properly. The nurse showed her how to support his head, how to cradle him against her chest. Alexander's eyes opened, dark blue, unfocused, and Elena felt something in her chest crack open. This was love. Not the complicated, compromised thing she'd felt for Victor, but something pure and uncomplicated and absolutely terrifying in its intensity. She would do anything for this child, anything, even if it meant accepting help from a man she could never trust. Victor visited twice a day, morning and evening. He never stayed long, never tried to touch her. He would stand by Alexander's incubator, watching his son with an expression Elena couldn't quite read, and then leave without pushing for conversation. On the 8th day, Dr. Roth appeared. Elena had wondered what happened to him, the old doctor who'd tried to save her and Alexander in the back of his Subaru. She'd imagined him back in Elkridge, worried, wondering if she'd survived. But when he walked into her room, his expression was calm, professional, as if this was exactly where he expected to find her. "You're looking better," he said, checking her chart. "The incision is healing well, no signs of infection. How's your pain?" "Manageable." Elena studied his face, looking for answers. "You knew, didn't you, that Victor would find me?" Dr. Roth set down the chart and met her eyes. "I knew someone was watching you. Hard not to notice in a town as small as Elkridge. And when your landlady's boiler was replaced overnight, when your car got fixed without you taking it to the shop. Yes, I suspected." "Why didn't you say anything? Would you have believed me?" He pulled up a chair and sat, his movements careful. "You needed to feel safe, Elena. Even if that safety was an illusion. You needed to believe you could protect that baby on your own, and for a while it worked. You got stronger, more confident. You stopped jumping at shadows. Because the shadows were working for Victor. Perhaps." Dr. Roth folded his hands. "But you still made the choice to stay, to build a life, however temporary. That took courage." Elena laughed bitterly. "A lot of good it did." "You gave your son 9 months of peace," Dr. Roth said quietly. 9 months where he grew safe, away from violence and fear. That's not nothing, Elena. That's everything." He stood, preparing to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth? Victor Hale called me the night you disappeared from Los Angeles, offered me more money than I'd make in 5 years if I'd keep an eye out for a pregnant woman trying to hide. I almost said no." "Why didn't you?" Dr. Roth's smile was sad. "Because he wasn't asking me to hurt you. He was asking me to keep you alive, and I thought, perhaps naively, that a father who cared that much about an unborn child might not be the monster everyone said he was." "He killed a man," Elena said. "I saw him do it." "I've killed men too," Dr. Roth replied. "Korea, 1952. Boys, really, 18, 19 years old. I shot them because someone told me they were the enemy, and I believed it." He met her eyes. "We all have blood on our hands, Elena. The question is what we do with the life we build afterward." He left her with that, and Elena sat in the quiet of her room, turning his words over in her mind. That night, Victor came later than usual. Elena had just finished feeding Alexander, a slow, awkward process she was still learning, when he knocked on the open door. "Can I come in?" Elena shifted Alexander to her shoulder, patting his back gently. "It's your facility. I assume you can go wherever you want." Victor stepped inside but stayed near the door, his hands in his pockets. "How is he?" "He's perfect." The words came out softer than Elena intended. "He ate well, slept for 3 hours straight." "And you?" "I'm fine." They lapsed into silence. Alexander made small sounds against Elena's shoulder, the contented noises of a full belly and a warm embrace. "I've been thinking about what you said," Elena said finally. "About protection. About the people who might come after us." Victor's expression remained carefully neutral. "And? I have conditions." "I'm listening." Elena adjusted Alexander in her arms, drawing strength from his small, solid weight. "First, I choose where we live. Not some penthouse in Los Angeles where I'm surrounded by your people. Somewhere quiet, private. Somewhere I can raise him without looking over my shoulder." Victor nodded slowly. "That can be arranged." "Second, I have my own money, my own accounts. I'm not financially dependent on you." "The trust fund I set up, not a trust fund you control," Elena interrupted. "Money that's mine, that I can access without asking permission." "Agreed." "Third," Elena took a breath, "we're not together. We're not a couple. We're co-parents. You get to be involved in Alexander's life, but you don't get to dictate mine." This time, Victor's expression flickered. "Elena, that's the deal," she said firmly. "You want us protected? You want us safe? Then you accept that I'm never going to forget what I saw in that alley. I'm never going to trust you the way I did before. This is a partnership for Alexander's sake, nothing more." Victor was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "Is that really what you want? To raise a child with someone you can barely stand to look at? I don't know what I want anymore, Elena admitted, but I know what I can live with. Can you? He studied her face, and she saw something like pain flash across his features before he locked it away. I can live with whatever keeps you and Alexander safe, he said finally, even if it means you hate me. I don't hate you. The words surprised Elena even as she said them. I wish I did. It would make this easier. Victor's eyes met hers, and for a moment she saw the man she'd fallen in love with. The one who'd brought her coffee in bed. Who'd listened to her talk about dreams she'd never shared with anyone else. Who'd made her feel like she was the center of his world. But that man had never existed. He'd been a mask, a version of Victor designed to win her trust. This was the real Victor, the one who killed without hesitation. Who controlled through money and fear. Who saw her and Alexander as possessions to be protected rather than people with agency of their own. And somehow, she had to build a life alongside him. There's one more thing, Elena said. I want the truth about what you do, about the people you work with, about the dangers we're actually facing. No more secrets. No more letting me think I'm safe when I'm not. Victor's jaw tightened. Some things are better left unknown. I don't get that luxury anymore, Elena shot back. If I'm going to protect Alexander, I need to understand the world he's being born into. So either you tell me or I find out on my own. And I promise you, Victor, me digging around in your business will be a lot more dangerous than just being honest. He stared at her for a long moment, then let out a breath that might have been a laugh. You're different, he said, than before. I had a baby cut out of me in the middle of a blizzard. Different doesn't even begin to cover it. Victor moved closer, and Elena tensed, but he simply reached out, his hand hovering near Alexander's head. May I? Elena nodded, and Victor's palm settled gently on their son's back. Alexander stirred but didn't wake, his tiny body rising and falling with each breath. I import things people need and export things they want to get rid of, Victor said quietly. Sometimes those things are legal, often they're not. I have business relationships with people who would kill me if they saw weakness, and I have enemies who would kill you and Alexander just to hurt me. Who's trying to kill you? Currently? The Volkov organization out of Brighton Beach. They think I've been moving in on their territory. The FBI, who've been building a RICO case for 3 years. And a man named Marcus Chen, who used to be my partner until he decided he wanted to be my replacement. Elena's arms tightened around Alexander. And you think bringing us into your life will make us safer? I think the alternative is you alone, broke and vulnerable, with a child who carries my DNA. Every criminal organization in the country knows how to run a paternity test, Elena. The moment they find you, they'll know exactly whose son Alexander is. At least with me, you have resources, protection, a chance. He was right, and Elena hated that he was right. Where would we go? She asked. This place you're thinking of. There's a property in Wyoming, 3,000 acres, most of it wilderness. The house is comfortable but isolated. Security can patrol the perimeter without being obvious about it. And it's far enough from any major city that casual trouble won't find you. Sounds like a prison with better scenery. Victor's hand slipped from Alexander's back. It's survival, Elena. That's all I can offer you right now. She looked down at her son, at the face that would grow into features she couldn't predict. Would he have Victor's intensity, her stubbornness, some combination that would make him entirely his own person? And what kind of life was she condemning him to by agreeing to this? But what kind of life would he have if she refused? Okay, Elena said quietly. We'll try it. Wyoming, your protection, this partnership. But Victor? She met his eyes. If I ever find out you're lying to me again, if you ever make me feel like a prisoner instead of a partner, I will find a way to disappear. And this time, you won't find me. Victor's expression was unreadable. I believe you. Good. He turned to leave, then stopped at the door. Thank you, he said without looking back, for giving me this chance. Elena didn't respond. Couldn't respond. Because she wasn't sure if she was being brave or foolish, making a choice or giving up. All she knew was that Alexander was warm in her arms, and for now, that had to be enough. The house in Wyoming was exactly what Victor had promised, comfortable, isolated, and absolutely inescapable. Elena saw it for the first time from the passenger seat of a black SUV, Alexander sleeping in a car seat beside her. They'd been driving for hours, leaving the private medical facility behind for roads that grew progressively narrower and less maintained. The last 20 miles had been dirt and gravel, winding through pine forests so dense they blocked out the afternoon sun. Then the trees opened up, and there it was. The house sat in a valley surrounded by mountains on three sides, a sprawling structure of timber and stone that managed to look both rustic and expensive. Large windows caught the late autumn light. A wraparound porch suggested summer evenings that Elena couldn't quite imagine. And beyond it, stretching toward the tree line, were fences that looked decorative but probably served a very different purpose. "It's beautiful," Elena said, and meant it. Victor, who'd been silent for most of the drive, glanced at her. "You sound surprised." "I expected something more like a compound. Guard towers, razor wire." "The security is there," Victor said. "You just can't see it. Motion sensors in the trees, cameras disguised as birdhouses. The fences are electrified, though the current is low enough that wildlife can touch them without getting hurt." He paused. "I wanted it to feel like a home, not a prison." Elena looked at him, trying to reconcile this man, who'd apparently spent months designing a safe haven for a woman who'd run from him, with the one who'd ordered an execution without blinking. "How long have you owned this place?" she asked. "I bought the land 2 weeks after you disappeared. Started construction a month later." The timeline made her stomach twist. While she'd been hiding in Elk Ridge, working double shifts at Millie's diner and trying to save enough money for baby supplies, Victor had been building her a house. Not a cage, though it would serve that purpose, but an actual home, designed with the kind of attention to detail that suggested he'd thought about what she might want. It made everything more complicated. The SUV pulled up to the front entrance, and two men appeared from somewhere Elena couldn't identify. They were dressed casually, jeans, flannel shirts, but moved with the kind of precision that marked them as Victor's people. One of them opened Elena's door, while the other retrieved luggage from the back. "Mrs. Hale," the first man said, offering his hand to help her out. Elena froze. We're not married." The man's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. He glanced at Victor, who gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. "My apologies, ma'am. Elena, then. I'm Thomas. I oversee security for the property. If you need anything, day or night, just call the house line and ask for me." Elena nodded, her arms full of Alexander's carrier. The baby had woken during the drive's final stretch and was making the small fussing sounds that meant he'd be demanding food soon. Inside, the house was even more impressive. Vaulted ceilings, a stone fireplace that dominated the living room, furniture that looked comfortable rather than showy. The kitchen was restaurant quality, all stainless steel and granite counters. And upstairs, Victor showed her to a master suite that was larger than her entire apartment had been in Los Angeles. "There's a nursery through that door," Victor said, gesturing to a connecting room. "But I thought you might want him close for the first few months." Elena walked to the doorway and looked inside. The nursery was perfect. A crib with white linens, a changing table stocked with diapers and supplies, a rocking chair positioned near the window, which overlooked the valley and the mountains beyond. On the wall, someone had painted a mural of a forest at twilight, with stars just beginning to appear through the trees. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Did you?" "I hired someone," Victor said. "I sent them pictures of forests you'd posted online, from before. I thought you might like being reminded of places that felt peaceful." Elena's throat tightened. She'd forgotten about those photos, hikes she'd taken years ago, back when her biggest worry was whether she'd get promoted at work. Victor had remembered, had saved them, had used them to create something meant to comfort her. It would have been romantic if it wasn't also evidence of how thoroughly he'd catalogued her life. Alexander chose that moment to begin crying in earnest, his small face scrunching with displeasure. "I should feed him," Elena said, grateful for the interruption. Victor nodded. "I'll have dinner brought up. You should rest. The drive was long." He left, and Elena was alone with her son in a beautiful house that felt like both sanctuary and trap. The first week passed in a haze of sleepless nights and the steep learning curve of new motherhood. Alexander ate every 3 hours like clockwork. He cried when he was wet, when he was hungry, when he simply wanted to be held. Elena learned to function on broken sleep, to change diapers in the dark, to distinguish between different types of cries. A nurse appeared the second day, a woman in her 50s named Margaret, who had kind eyes and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd raised 5 children of her own. She showed Elena how to burp Alexander properly, how to swaddle him so he felt secure, how to tell if he was eating enough. Mr. Hale said you didn't have family to help, Margaret said as she demonstrated the correct angle for bottle feeding. So I'll be here every day for the first month, just until you get your feet under you. Victor hired you, Elena said. It wasn't a question. He did, but I'm here for you and the baby, not for him. If you need something, you tell me. If you want me to leave, you tell me that too. Elena found herself grateful for Margaret's presence, even though she knew it was just another form of Victor's control. The older woman didn't judge, didn't ask questions about Elena's relationship with Alexander's father. She simply showed up every morning, helped with whatever Elena needed, and left every evening after making sure both mother and baby were settled. Victor himself was rarely around. He'd disappear for hours, sometimes entire days. When Elena asked where he went, he'd say simply, "Work," and change the subject. She suspected he was trying to give her space, trying to honor the boundaries she'd set. But his absence felt heavier than his presence somehow, like he was a storm system just over the horizon, waiting to move in. On the 8th day, Elena ventured outside for the first time. It was a clear morning, cold, but not unbearable. She bundled Alexander in layers and carried him out onto the porch, needing to feel fresh air on her face, needing to see something other than the inside of the house. The valley was stunning. Mountains rose on all sides, their peaks already dusted with early snow. The aspens were bare now, their white trunks standing out against the dark pines. A creek ran somewhere close. She could hear the sound of running water, though she couldn't see it from the porch. Beautiful, isn't it? Elena turned to find Victor standing in the doorway, coffee cup in hand. She hadn't heard him approach. "How long have you been watching me?" she asked. "About 5 minutes. I didn't want to interrupt." He gestured to the valley. "There's a trail that follows the creek. Easy walk. Margaret said you're healing well enough for short distances." "You talked to Margaret about me?" "I ask about Alexander. She volunteers information about you." Victor stepped onto the porch, keeping a respectful distance. "I'm not spying, Elena. I'm just trying to make sure you have what you need." Elena looked down at Alexander, who was staring up at the sky with the unfocused fascination of a newborn encountering something vast. "I need to understand what our life looks like here," she said. "You said you'd be honest, about the dangers, about what happens next." Victor set his coffee down on the porch railing. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. Start with why we're really here. And don't tell me it's just about safety. There are 100 places you could have taken us that would have been safer and less isolated." Victor was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the mountains. When he spoke, his voice was measured, careful. "You're right. There are safer places. Places with better security infrastructure, closer to hospitals, closer to resources." He turned to face her. "But those places would have made you feel trapped. They would have been obviously what they are, gilded cages. I thought if I gave you space, if I gave you beauty and privacy, you might actually want to stay. So this is about control, making me compliant." "This is about giving you a choice," Victor said. "Real choice, not the illusion of it. You can leave, Elena. I won't stop you, but I need you to understand what you'd be leaving into. The FBI, the Volkovs, Marcus Chen. You told me about them already. I told you the basics. Let me tell you the specifics." Victor leaned against the railing, his expression grim. "The FBI has surveillance on 15 of my properties. They've flipped 2 of my people, low-level guys who think cooperating will keep them out of prison. They're building a RICO case, and they need a narrative that ties me to specific crimes. You witnessed one of those crimes. If they find you, they'll subpoena you, put you in front of a grand jury, and if you refuse to testify, they'll charge you with obstruction." Elena's arms tightened around Alexander. I could just tell them the truth, that I don't know anything about your business. You could. But Marcus Chen won't care about truth. He'll care that you exist, that you're vulnerable. He's the one who's been feeding information to the feds, trying to take me down so he can absorb my operations. If he finds out about you and Alexander, he won't hesitate to use you as leverage. Leverage how? Victor's jaw tightened. However he needs to. Kidnapping, threats. He's not subtle, and he's not patient. 3 months ago, he killed the wife of one of my competitors. Shot her in a grocery store parking lot just to prove he could. The message was clear. Family isn't off limits anymore. Elena felt sick. And the Volkovs? Old school organization, Russian mob with ties going back decades. They think I'm moving product through their territory without paying tribute. They're wrong, but they won't believe that without proof I can't give them. They've been probing my security looking for weak points. They haven't found any yet, but they're persistent. So we're hiding from the FBI, a rival crime boss, and the Russian mob. Elena's voice came out flat, emotionless. Is there anyone who isn't trying to kill us? Plenty of people, Victor said, but they're not the ones who matter. Alexander began to fuss, his small face scrunching. Elena rocked him gently, her mind racing through everything Victor had just told her. Why tell me all this now? She asked. Why not before, when you were trying to convince me to come here? Because before you wouldn't have believed me. You'd have thought I was exaggerating to scare you into compliance. Victor's eyes met hers. But you've had time now. Time to see that I'm not locking you up, not controlling your every move. I'm giving you information so you can make informed decisions. Informed decisions, Elena repeated, like whether to stay in this beautiful prison or risk our lives trying to leave. Like whether to trust that I'm telling you the truth when I say the safest place for you and Alexander is right here, with me. Elena wanted to argue, wanted to find holes in his logic, but everything he'd said made a terrible kind of sense. She was visible now, known. The moment she'd walked into that hospital to deliver Alexander, she'd created a record. And even if Victor's people had buried it, records had a way of surfacing. I want to meet them, she said suddenly. Victor's eyebrows rose. Who? The people who work for you, the ones providing security here. If I'm going to trust you to keep us safe, I need to know who's actually doing the protecting. For the first time since she'd arrived, Victor smiled. It was small, barely there, but genuine. Okay, he said. I'll set it up. That afternoon, Elena met the security team in the house's main living room. There were 8 of them, not counting Victor, and they ranged from Thomas, the first man she'd met, to a woman named Sarah, who looked like she could kill someone with a butter knife. These are the people who monitor the property, Victor said, standing beside Elena while Alexander dozed in his carrier. They work in shifts. There's always at least 2 people on duty, more if I'm here. They're armed, but they've been instructed that their primary job is observation and alert, not engagement. What does that mean? Elena asked. Thomas spoke up. It means if we spot a threat, we call for backup before we act. Mr. Hale doesn't want you anywhere near a firefight. Our job is to make sure threats never get close enough to become your problem. Elena looked at each of them in turn, these strangers who'd been hired to stand between her son and violence. Have there been threats already? She asked. The team members exchanged glances. Thomas cleared his throat. 3 incidents since the house was finished. Twice, we caught people trying to breach the perimeter. Both times they were looking for the property owner, not residents. We detained them and turned them over to local law enforcement on trespassing charges. And the 3rd time? Drone, Sarah said. Civilian grade. Probably just some YouTuber trying to film private property. We jammed the signal and it crashed in the woods. We kept the wreckage, checked it for surveillance equipment. It was clean. How can you be sure? Because surveillance equipment leaves traces, Sarah said, and because we're very good at our jobs. Elena wanted to feel reassured. These people were clearly professionals, but knowing that drones were already trying to photograph the property, that people were attempting to breach the fences, it made the danger feel immediate rather than theoretical. I want to know, she said, looking at Victor. Every time something happens, every time there's an incident, I want to be informed immediately. Victor nodded. I'll make sure of it. And I want to learn how to protect myself, how to shoot, how to recognize threats, all of it. If something happens and I'm alone with Alexander, I need to be able to keep him safe. This time, Victor hesitated. Elena, don't, she cut him off. Don't tell me I won't need those skills. Don't tell me your people will handle everything. You brought me here because I'm in danger. The least you can do is teach me how to survive it. Victor's expression was unreadable. Then he turned to Sarah. Can you train her? Sarah looked at Elena with something like respect. I can. We'll start with basics, situational awareness, then move to firearms if she's ready. I'm ready, Elena said. The training started the next day. Sarah was a patient teacher, though her methods were unconventional. Instead of starting with guns, she taught Elena how to move through the house, how to identify exits, how to notice when something was out of place. Most people think security is about weapons, Sarah explained as they walked the perimeter of the house. But weapons are a last resort. Your first line of defense is awareness. Notice everything. The car that's been parked on the road for too long, the delivery person who shows up when you didn't order anything, the sound of the alarm system not arming properly. They practiced scenarios. Sarah would create situations, a window left unlocked, an unfamiliar vehicle in the driveway, and Elena would have to identify the threat and respond appropriately. What do I do if someone gets into the house? Elena asked during one session. Depends on where you are. If you're in the nursery with Alexander, you lock the panic room door and call for help. If you're downstairs, you go up, grab the baby, then panic room. Never try to fight unless there's absolutely no other choice. There's a panic room? Sarah looked at her in surprise. You didn't know? It's behind the bookshelf in the nursery. Reinforced steel, independent air supply, satellite phone. Enough supplies to last 3 days if necessary. Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. Victor had built a panic room into the nursery, had planned for the possibility that someone might breach the house while she was alone with their son. That night, after Margaret left and Alexander was sleeping, Elena found Victor in his study. Why didn't you tell me about the panic room? She asked without preamble. Victor looked up from the papers he'd been reviewing. I thought it would scare you. Everything scares me, Elena shot back. But at least if I know about it, I can prepare. I can practice getting there quickly. I can make sure I have what I need. Victor set down his pen. You're right. I should have told you. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. Sit. Let me show you something. Elena sat, and Victor pulled out a tablet. He tapped a few buttons, and the screen filled with a map of the property, marked with symbols Elena didn't recognize. Red dots are cameras, Victor explained. Blue are motion sensors. Green are panic buttons. Press any of them, and the entire security team gets alerted. Yellow are the electrified fence sections. There were dozens of dots, hundreds maybe. The property was completely blanketed in surveillance. And this, Victor said, tapping another icon, is the feed from the nursery. The screen changed to show Alexander sleeping in his crib, his small chest rising and falling. Elena could see every detail, the curve of his cheek, the way his hand curled near his face. I have access to this feed on my phone, Victor said quietly. Wherever I am, whatever I'm doing, I can check on him, make sure he's safe. Elena stared at this image of her sleeping son. You watch him. All the time. Victor's voice was raw. I know it's invasive. I know it crosses lines, but I can't help it. I spent 9 months not knowing if he was okay, if you were okay. Now that I have the ability to check, I can't stop myself. Elena looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the exhaustion etched into his face, the dark circles under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders that never quite released. When was the last time you slept? She asked. Victor laughed, the sound harsh. I don't remember. That's not sustainable. Neither is letting my guard down long enough for someone to hurt you. They sat in silence for a moment, the tablet screen still showing Alexander's peaceful sleep. I don't know how to do this, Elena said finally. How to be grateful for your protection and angry about how we got here. How to want you involved in Alexander's life and not want you in mine. How to hate what you are and not hate you. You don't have to figure it out all at once, Victor said, but I do. Because every day I don't figure it out is another day Alexander grows up in this, whatever this is, this arrangement, this partnership built on fear and necessity. Victor leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving her face. What do you want it to be instead? I don't know, Elena admitted. Something honest. Something where I'm not constantly wondering what you're hiding, where I'm not constantly afraid. I can't promise you won't be afraid, Victor said. The world we live in, the enemies I've made, fear is reasonable. But I can promise honesty. Ask me anything, and I'll tell you the truth. Elena took a breath, then asked the question that had been eating at her since that night in Los Angeles. The man in the alley, the one you killed, did he have a family? Victor's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Yes, a wife, 2 daughters. Where are they now? The wife moved back to her family in Nevada. I set up a trust for the daughter's education. They'll never know where the money came from. Elena's hands clenched in her lap. You think that makes it better? You think money erases what you did? No, Victor said. But it's all I can offer them. I can't bring him back. I can't undo the choice he made to sell information that got good people killed. All I can do is make sure his children don't suffer for his mistakes. And his wife? Does she get a say in whether she wants blood money paying for her kids' college? She doesn't know. She thinks it's a scholarship fund from an anonymous donor. Victor's voice was flat, matter of fact. Sometimes mercy means lying. Elena stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. I can't listen to this. I can't sit here and have you justify murder like it's a business decision. I'm not justifying it, Victor said, standing as well. I'm explaining it. You asked for honesty. This is what honesty looks like in my world. Then your world is broken. Yes, Victor agreed. It is. But it's the world our son was born into, and pretending otherwise won't keep him safe. Elena walked to the door, then stopped. Without turning around, she said, The trust fund for those girls. Make sure it's enough. Make sure they never have to worry about money, not just college. Everything. I will. She left him standing in the study and went upstairs to check on Alexander. He was still sleeping, exactly as he'd appeared on the camera feed. Elena stood by his crib, her hand resting on his small back, and tried to make sense of the impossible situation she'd accepted. Victor was a killer, a criminal, a man who operated outside the boundaries of law and morality. But he was also a father who watched his son sleep through a camera feed because 9 months of not knowing had left wounds that wouldn't heal. He was both things. And somehow, Elena had to figure out how to navigate a life where both things were true. The weeks that followed developed a strange rhythm. Elena spent her days with Alexander, learning the countless small details of keeping a tiny human alive and content. Margaret taught her about tummy time and developmental milestones. Sarah taught her about threat assessment and escape routes. And Victor, when he was there, existed in the periphery, present but not intrusive, available but not demanding. They ate dinner together sometimes, the 3 of them at the large dining room table that felt absurdly formal for takeout from whatever restaurant Victor had food delivered from. They'd talk about Alexander's latest accomplishment, holding his head up for 3 seconds, making eye contact, producing a smile that was probably just gas but felt like magic anyway. They didn't talk about Los Angeles, didn't talk about the FBI case or the enemies circling, didn't talk about the fact that they were essentially strangers playing house in the middle of nowhere, held together by nothing more substantial than shared DNA and mutual fear. It was almost peaceful, almost normal, until the night everything shattered. Elena woke to Alexander crying. Nothing unusual. He was due for a feeding. She rolled out of bed, still half asleep, and padded to the nursery. The window was open. Elena's blood turned to ice. She never opened that window. It was November in Wyoming, far too cold. And yet there it was, curtains billowing in the wind, letting in air that made the nursery feel like a freezer. She ran to Alexander's crib. He was there, crying but safe, his small body warm beneath the blankets. Elena scooped him up, her heart hammering, and back toward the panic room. That's when she saw it. On the changing table, placed carefully among the diapers and wipes, was a photograph. Elena knew she should run, should hit the panic button, should do anything except walk closer to look at that photograph. But she couldn't help herself. It showed her and Alexander from earlier that day. They'd been on the porch, Elena holding the baby while pointing out birds in the trees. The photo was taken from a distance, probably with a telephoto lens, but the image was clear enough to see their faces. On the back, written in neat block letters, was a message. Nice family. Would be a shame if something happened to them. Elena's hands shook so hard she nearly dropped both Alexander and the photograph. She stumbled backward, hit the panic button on the wall, and ran for the panic room. The bookshelf swung open at her touch. Victor must have programmed her fingerprints, and Elena threw herself inside, slamming the steel door behind her. Alexander was screaming now, picking up on her fear. Elena tried to soothe him with one hand while fumbling for the satellite phone with the other. She dialed the number Victor had made her memorize. He answered on the first ring. "Elena, what's wrong?" "Someone was in the nursery," she gasped. "Someone opened the window, left a photograph, a threat." "Are you in the panic room?" "Yes." "Good. Stay there. I'm 10 minutes out." "Victor, I'm already on my way. Don't open that door for anyone but me. I'll knock 3 times, pause, then twice more. That's the signal. Don't open it for anything else." The line went dead. Elena sat on the floor of the panic room. Alexander pressed against her chest and waited. The panic room was smaller than Elena had imagined when Sarah first mentioned it, maybe 8 feet by 10, with supplies stacked neatly on metal shelving and a single chair bolted to the floor. Emergency lights cast everything in a harsh white glow that made her eyes ache. Alexander had finally quieted, exhausted from crying, his small body heavy and warm against her chest. Elena counted her heartbeats, trying to slow her breathing. 1 minute, 2, 5. Every sound from outside the steel door made her flinch. Was that footsteps? Was someone trying to break in? The panic room was supposed to be impenetrable, but so was the house, and someone had walked right in and left a photograph on her baby's changing table. 7 minutes after Victor's call, she heard it. 3 knocks. A pause. 2 more. Elena stood on shaking legs and moved to the door. Alexander clutched tight in one arm. Her hand hovered over the lock. "It's me." Victor's voice came through the steel. "Open the door, Elena." She did, and Victor swept into the room, his eyes scanning her and Alexander with an intensity that bordered on frantic. He was dressed in dark clothing, a gun visible in a shoulder holster she'd never seen him wear before. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. "No, we're fine, but Victor, someone was in the nursery. The window—" "I know. Thomas is reviewing the security footage now." His hands moved over her shoulders, down her arms, checking for injuries she didn't have. Then he turned his attention to Alexander, his fingers gentle as he examined the baby for any sign of harm. "How did they get in?" Elena asked. "You said the security was perfect. You said—" "I was wrong. The admission came out harsh, angry, which means I need to move you, both of you, tonight." "Move us where?" "Somewhere safer, somewhere they won't find you." Victor pulled out his phone, already typing. "Pack what you need for Alexander. Clothes, formula, essentials. We leave in 20 minutes. Elena's free hand shot out and grabbed his wrist, stopping him mid-type. "No." Victor looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "Elena, someone breached the house, left a threat. We can't stay here." "We can't keep running," Elena shot back. "That's what I did for 9 months, remember? I ran and you found me anyway. What makes you think moving to another house, another city, another state will make any difference? Because this time I'll make sure—" "You'll make sure of what?" Elena's voice rose, and Alexander stirred against her. She forced herself to lower her volume. "You'll make sure the security is better? You said that about this place. You'll make sure no one knows where we are." "People always know, Victor. They always find out." Victor's jaw clenched. "So what do you suggest? We stay here and wait for them to come back? Wait for them to do more than leave a photograph?" "I suggest we figure out who did this and deal with them." Elena met his eyes, her voice steady, despite the fear coursing through her veins. "You said you'd be honest with me. You said you'd tell me about threats, so tell me. Who left that photograph?" Victor was silent for a long moment. Then he turned and walked out of the panic room, leaving Elena to follow. In the nursery, Thomas and Sarah were examining the window while two other security team members checked the rest of the room. The photograph lay on the changing table exactly where Elena had found it, now sealed in a clear evidence bag. "Talk," Victor said to Thomas. Thomas looked uncomfortable. "Someone cut the power to the perimeter sensors at 2:47 a.m. We didn't catch it because they looped the feed, made it look like everything was functioning normally. By the time the system caught the discrepancy and alerted us, they were already gone." "How long were the sensors down?" 11 minutes. Victor's expression went cold in a way Elena had only seen once before, in that rain-soaked alley in Los Angeles. 11 minutes. Someone had 11 minutes of unrestricted access to this house, to my family, and no one noticed. "Sir, the system is designed to catch anomalies, but nothing." Victor's voice was quiet, which somehow made it more terrifying. "I pay you to keep them safe. One job. And you failed." Sarah stepped forward. "With respect, sir, whoever did this knew our systems. They knew exactly where to cut power, exactly how to loop the feeds. This wasn't some random threat. This was professional." Victor turned to look at the photograph, still in its evidence bag. "Chen," he said. "It has to be. He's the only one who'd have the resources and the knowledge." "Chen doesn't know about this location," Thomas said. "We've been careful. Clearly not careful enough." Victor picked up the evidence bag, staring at the image of Elena and Alexander on the porch. "He's sending a message, proving he can reach us whenever he wants." Elena felt cold despite the warmth of Alexander in her arms. "What does he want?" "Me to back down, to cede territory, to acknowledge him as an equal player." Victor set the photograph down, his hands clenching into fists. "Or he wants to provoke me into making a mistake, doing something reckless that the FBI can use against me." "And what are you going to do?" Elena asked. Victor looked at her and she saw the war playing out behind his eyes, the part of him that wanted to hunt down Marcus Chen and end this threat permanently, and the part that knew doing so would only prove Chen's point, that Victor was unstable, dangerous, exactly the kind of criminal the FBI narrative painted him to be. "I'm going to negotiate," Victor said finally. "Set up a meeting, find out what he really wants." "That's suicide," Sarah said flatly. "Chen's not interested in negotiation. He's interested in power. The second you show up to a meeting, he'll try to kill you." "Then I'll make sure I'm ready for that." Victor turned back to Thomas. "I want the security systems upgraded. Redundant sensors, multiple feeds, random pattern changes. And I want someone on the nursery 24/7, not just monitoring, physical presence." "Victor, that's not necessary," Elena started to say. "Yes, it is." He faced her, his expression leaving no room for argument. "Someone got into our son's room. They could have taken him. They could have hurt him. I won't give them a second chance." Our son. It was the first time he'd said it that way, claiming Alexander as a shared possession rather than Elena's child he happened to have contributed DNA to. "I want to be there," Elena said. "When you meet with Chen, I want to hear what he has to say." "Absolutely not. It's not a request." Elena shifted Alexander to her shoulder, her chin lifting. "You said we're partners. You said you'd be honest with me. That means I get to be part of decisions that affect my safety and Alexander's. If you're going to negotiate with the man who threatened us, I deserve to be there." "Elena, these meetings can turn violent without warning. I won't risk—" "You're already risking everything by going yourself," Elena interrupted. "At least if I'm there, I'll know firsthand what we're dealing with. I'll know if Chen is serious or if this is just posturing." Victor stared at her like he was seeing someone new. "You've changed," he said quietly. "The woman I knew in Los Angeles would never have asked to walk into a room with a crime boss." "The woman you knew in Los Angeles didn't have a child to protect," Elena replied. "And she didn't understand that running and hiding doesn't keep you safe. It just makes you easier to control." Something flickered in Victor's expression, pride maybe, or concern. Possibly both. "Fine," he said, "but you follow my lead. You don't speak unless I tell you to. And at the first sign of trouble, you do exactly what I say without question." "Agreed." Thomas and Sarah exchanged glances that suggested they thought both Victor and Elena had lost their minds. But neither of them argued. The meeting was set for 3 days later, at a restaurant in Billings that Chen apparently owned through a series of shell companies. Victor spent those 3 days preparing, running through scenarios with his security team, making contingency plans, arranging backup in case things went wrong. Elena spent them with Alexander, memorizing every detail of his face as if this might be the last time she held him. She hated that her mind went there, but she couldn't help it. She was about to walk into a room with the man who'd threatened her son, the man who'd proven he could reach them despite all of Victor's precautions. On the morning of the meeting, Margaret arrived early. "I heard about what happened," the older woman said, gathering Alexander into her arms with practiced ease. "And I heard about where you're going today." "Victor told you?" "Didn't have to. I've worked for men like him before. I know what a meeting means." Margaret settled into the rocking chair, Alexander content against her chest. "You don't have to do this, you know. You could stay here. Let Victor handle it." "I could," Elena agreed. "But I'm tired of letting other people make decisions about my life." Margaret studied her for a long moment. "You're braver than I was at your age. I hope it doesn't cost you what it cost me." Elena wanted to ask what Margaret meant, but Victor appeared in the doorway, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than Elena's car had back in Los Angeles. "Ready?" he asked. Elena kissed Alexander's forehead, breathing in his baby smell, then forced herself to step away. "Ready." The drive to Billings took 2 hours. Victor was quiet for most of it, his eyes on the road, his jaw tight with tension. Sarah drove while Thomas sat in the passenger seat, both of them armed and alert. Another SUV followed 20 yards behind, more security, though Elena didn't know their names. "Tell me about Chen," Elena said finally, needing to break the silence. "What kind of man is he?" Victor glanced at her. "Smart, ruthless. He came up through the Chinese triads in San Francisco, then branched out on his own when he saw an opportunity. He's younger than me by about 5 years, which makes him impatient. He wants to build an empire, and he sees me as an obstacle." "Why?" "Because I control shipping routes he needs. Because I have relationships with suppliers he wants access to. Because as long as I'm around, he'll always be second tier." Victor's fingers drummed on his knee, a rare show of nervous energy. "He's been making moves for the last year, small at first, undercutting my prices, spreading rumors about my reliability. But it's escalating." "The photograph," Elena said, "that was escalation." "Yes. He's trying to prove I can't protect my own family, that I'm weak." "Are you?" Elena asked. "Weak?" Victor's eyes met hers, and she saw something raw in them. "When it comes to you and Alexander, yes. I would burn everything I've built to keep you safe. Chen knows that, and he'll use it against me if he can." They arrived at the restaurant just before noon, a upscale Italian place that looked absurdly normal for a meeting between criminals. Victor led Elena inside while Sarah and Thomas positioned themselves near the entrance, trying to look casual despite the obvious weapons hidden beneath their jackets. The hostess recognized Victor immediately. "Mr. Hale, Mr. Chen is expecting you. He's in the private dining room." She led them through the main restaurant to a door at the back. Victor's hand found Elena's elbow, a light touch that she suspected was meant to be reassuring, but felt more like a claim of ownership. The private dining room was elegant, dark wood paneling, a table set for 6, windows overlooking a garden that was dormant for winter. And sitting at the head of the table, looking completely at ease, was Marcus Chen. He was younger than Elena had expected, maybe late 30s, with sharp features and eyes that assessed her with the same calculation she imagined he used when evaluating business opportunities. 2 men flanked him, both large enough to be bodyguards, though they wore suits that suggested a higher pay grade. "Victor," Chen said, standing with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Thank you for coming. And you brought a guest?" "My partner," Victor said, the word deliberate. "Elena Carter." Chen's eyebrows rose. "The woman who disappeared. The FBI's been looking for you, Ms. Carter. I'm surprised Victor's keeping you so close. Seems like a liability." "Elena is here because the matter we're discussing concerns her directly," Victor said, his voice cool. "You broke into my home, threatened my family. I wanted her to hear your explanation firsthand." Chen's smile widened. Explanation? I don't think I need to explain anything, but please sit. Let's talk like civilized people. They sat, Victor positioning himself between Elena and Chen. The air in the room felt charged, dangerous. I'll be direct, Chen said, pouring himself wine from the bottle on the table. You're in my way, Victor. You have been for years, and I'm done waiting for you to step aside gracefully. I built these roots, Victor said, these relationships. You want what I have, you'll need to earn it. Or I could just take it. Chen took a sip of wine, his eyes never leaving Victor's face. Your organization is strong, I'll give you that. But it's not invulnerable. The FBI is building their case, your people are getting nervous. And now you have something you never had before, a weakness I can exploit. His gaze shifted to Elena, and she felt her skin crawl. Your son is what, 6 weeks old? Chen continued. Beautiful child. I saw the photographs. He has your eyes. Elena's hands clenched in her lap, but she forced herself to remain still, silent. You threatened my family again, Victor said, his voice dropping to something deadly. And this conversation ends very differently than you're hoping. I'm not threatening anyone, Chen said mildly. I'm simply pointing out facts. You have vulnerabilities now. A child to protect. A woman who witnessed you commit murder. These are complications, Victor. And in our business, complications get people killed. What do you want? Victor asked. Your routes through the Pacific Northwest, your contacts in Vancouver, and your promise to stay out of California entirely. Chen leaned back in his chair. Give me that, and I have no reason to pursue your family. We can coexist peacefully. And if I refuse? Chen's smile turned cold. Then I'll make sure that the FBI finds Ms. Carter. That they put her in front of a grand jury. That they offer her immunity in exchange for testimony about what she saw in that alley. You'll go to prison, your organization will crumble, and I'll step in to fill the vacuum. Either way, I get what I want. I'm just giving you the option of a softer landing. Elena felt Victor's tension radiating through the small space between them. This was the moment Chen had been building toward. The threat wrapped in an offer, the illusion of choice that was really just another cage. But before Victor could respond, Elena spoke. No. Both men turned to look at her. Victor's expression was warning, but Elena ignored it. I'm sorry, Chen said, his tone suggesting he wasn't accustomed to being contradicted. I said no. Elena met his gaze directly. You're making assumptions that aren't true. You assume I'll testify against Victor if the FBI finds me. You assume I'm a weakness he'll sacrifice everything to protect. You assume that because I'm a woman with a child, I must be controllable. Elena, Victor started, but she cut him off. I ran from Victor for 9 months, she continued, her voice steady. I hid in a town of less than 3,000 people. I worked in a diner and lived in a room above a hardware store. And the entire time, Victor knew where I was. He could have dragged me back at any point, but he didn't. Do you know why? Chen's expression had shifted from amusement to something more calculating. Because he understood that controlling me would only make me more determined to escape, Elena said. That the only way we could build something sustainable was if I chose to stay. And I have chosen. Not because I'm weak, not because I don't have other options, but because I looked at the reality of my situation and decided that being Victor's partner was better than being his victim or his enemy. She leaned forward slightly, her hands still in her lap, but her posture radiating a confidence she didn't entirely feel. So, when you threaten my son, when you break into my home and leave photographs like some kind of third-rate thriller villain, you're not proving that Victor is weak. You're proving that you don't understand how this works. You think family is a liability. I think it's the only reason any of this matters. The room was very quiet. Chen's bodyguards had shifted slightly, their hands moving closer to weapons Elena couldn't see but knew were there. Then Chen started laughing. I like her, he said, looking at Victor. I can see why you kept her around. She's got spine. She's also right, Victor said, his voice carrying a warning. You've miscalculated. Elena isn't going to testify against me with or without immunity. And threatening her only makes me more committed to destroying you rather than negotiating. Chen's laughter faded. Then we have a problem. We do, Victor agreed. But it's not the problem you think. You want my roots, my contacts, my territory? Fine. Let's negotiate. But the second you bring my family into this again, negotiations end and war begins. And Marcus? You don't want a war with me. The two men stared at each other across the table, and Elena felt the weight of everything unspoken. The violence both of them were capable of, the organizations that would mobilize with a single word, the casualties that would pile up on both sides if this went wrong. Your Pacific Northwest routes, Chen said finally, in exchange for guaranteed peace. No retaliation, no undermining. We split the territory and leave each other alone. And you stay away from Elena and Alexander, Victor added. Not just physically. No surveillance, no photographs, no attempts to use them as leverage. That's non-negotiable. Chen considered this, his fingers drumming on the table. Agreed. But I want it in writing. A contract both of us sign, with penalties if either party violates the terms. Fine. My lawyers will draw up the documents. I'll have my people review them. Chen stood, and his bodyguards immediately moved to flank him. It's been interesting, Victor. Ms. Carter, a pleasure to meet the woman who finally made Victor Hale vulnerable. I didn't make him anything, Elena said. He chose this, just like I did. Chen smiled, but this time it looked almost genuine. Perhaps you're right. Perhaps we all choose our prisons. Some are just prettier than others. He left, his bodyguards trailing behind him, and suddenly the room felt larger, safer. Victor turned to Elena, his expression unreadable. That was either the bravest or most foolish thing you've ever done. Probably both, Elena admitted, her hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. Did I just make things worse? No. Victor's hand found hers, squeezing gently. You made him see you as a person instead of a pawn. That might be the only thing that keeps this agreement from falling apart the second it's convenient for him to break it. Sarah appeared in the doorway. We should go. The longer we stay, the more exposed we are. They left the restaurant and drove back to Wyoming in silence. Elena spent the entire drive thinking about what she'd done, the risk she'd taken by speaking when Victor had told her to stay silent. But watching Chen's expression shift from condescension to respect had been worth it. When they arrived back at the house, Elena went immediately to the nursery. Margaret was still there, Alexander sleeping peacefully in her arms. How did it go? Margaret asked quietly. Better than expected, Elena said, taking Alexander and holding him close. Or maybe just differently. Margaret stood, gathering her things. Sometimes different is all we can hope for. After Margaret left, Elena sat in the rocking chair with Alexander, watching the late afternoon sun paint the mountains in shades of gold and orange. Victor appeared in the doorway, his suit jacket gone, his tie loosened. Thank you, he said, for what you did today, for backing me up. I wasn't backing you up, Elena replied. I was protecting Alexander. There's a difference. Is there? Victor moved into the room, sitting on the floor near the rocking chair. Because from where I'm sitting, it looked like you were protecting both of us. Elena didn't know how to answer that, because he might be right. Somewhere in the last 6 weeks, her motivation had shifted from pure survival to something more complicated. She didn't trust Victor, not completely, maybe not ever, but she was beginning to understand him, and understanding was its own kind of dangerous. Chen was right about one thing, she said finally. We all choose our prisons. I chose this one, this house, this arrangement, this life. And maybe that makes me foolish, or maybe it makes me practical. I don't know anymore. It makes you human, Victor said, and it makes you the best mother Alexander could ask for. Elena looked down at her son, at the small face that was growing more distinct every day. He had Victor's dark hair, her nose, eyes that were still that unfocused newborn blue, but might eventually settle into something entirely his own. I need to know something, she said, and I need you to answer honestly. Always. If Chen had refused the deal, if he'd pushed for war instead of negotiation, would you have walked away, for us, or would you have fought? Victor was quiet for a long moment. I would have done whatever it took to keep you both safe, even if that meant burning everything else to the ground. That's what I thought. Elena's voice was soft, not quite sad, but not quite anything else either. And that's the problem, isn't it? You'd sacrifice anything for us, your business, your freedom, your life. But you can't see that sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't the enemy outside. It's the choices we make when we're afraid of losing what we love. I don't know how to be anything else, Victor admitted. How to care less. How to not see every threat as something that needs to be eliminated. I'm not asking you to care less, Elena said. I'm asking you to trust that I can help carry the weight. That we can figure this out together instead of you trying to control everything to keep us safe. Victor looked up at her, and in his eyes, she saw exhaustion and fear and something that might have been hope. I don't know if I can do that, he said honestly, but I want to try. Then that's enough, Elena said. For now, that's enough. They sat together in the fading light, the three of them, and for the first time since that rain-soaked night in Los Angeles, Elena felt like maybe they weren't just surviving. Maybe, impossibly, they were building something that could last. The contract with Chen arrived 2 weeks later, 40 pages of legal language that essentially boiled down to mutual non-aggression and territorial division. Victor's lawyers reviewed it, found no obvious loopholes, and Victor signed. Chen signed 2 days later, and just like that, one threat was neutralized. But Elena had learned enough by now to know that eliminating one threat just meant another would eventually surface. That was the nature of Victor's world, and by extension, hers. The difference was that now she understood what she'd agreed to. The dangers weren't abstract anymore. They had faces, names, specific methodologies, and while that knowledge was terrifying, it was also empowering. She continued her training with Sarah, moving from basic awareness to actual firearms instruction. The first time she fired a gun, the recoil surprised her, but by the 10th time, she was starting to understand the mechanics. By the 100th, she could hit a target at 20 yards more often than not. "You're a natural," Sarah said one afternoon, watching Elena reload with increasing confidence. "Most people never get comfortable with the weight of a weapon. You're already treating it like an extension of yourself." "I don't want to be comfortable with it," Elena replied. "I want to be capable. There's a difference." Sarah smiled. "Fair enough." Alexander grew, 3 months old, then 4. He smiled now, real smiles that lit up his whole face. He tracked movement with his eyes, reached for toys, made sounds that were starting to resemble actual communication. Every milestone felt like a small miracle, a reminder that despite everything, life continued. Children grew. Time passed. And slowly, without quite meaning to, Elena and Victor built something that resembled a family. They had dinner together most nights now. They took turns getting up with Alexander when he woke crying. They argued about small things, whether to start him on solid foods yet, whether the nursery was too warm, whether they should get a dog for when he was older. Normal things. Couple things. Except they weren't a couple. Until the night everything changed again. It happened on a Tuesday evening in late February, when Alexander was almost 4 months old, and the Wyoming winter had finally begun its slow retreat toward spring. Elena had put Alexander down for the night and was heading to her room when she heard it, a sound from Victor's study that made her pause. Not quite a sob, but close. A sharp intake of breath that spoke of pain being forcibly contained. She should have kept walking, should have respected his privacy. But something in that sound pulled at her, made her feet carry her to the half-open door. Victor sat at his desk, his head in his hands, his shoulders curved inward in a posture of defeat Elena had never seen from him. On the desk in front of him was a photograph, not the threatening one Chen had left, but something older, worn at the edges, creased from being handled too many times. "Victor?" Elena said softly. He looked up, and she saw his eyes were red-rimmed, his face stripped of the careful control he usually wore like armor. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rough. "I didn't mean to. I thought you were asleep. What's wrong?" Elena stepped into the room, drawn by the rawness of his expression. Victor looked down at the photograph, then slowly turned it so she could see. It showed a young woman, maybe early 20s, with dark hair and a smile that lit up her whole face. She was holding a little boy, maybe 3 years old, who had Victor's eyes and the same serious expression Elena sometimes saw on Alexander's face. "That's my sister," Victor said quietly. "Catherine. And her son, Daniel." Elena's breath caught. Victor had never mentioned family. She'd assumed he had none, or that they were estranged beyond repair. "Where are they now?" she asked, though something in Victor's expression told her she already knew the answer. "Dead, 8 years ago." Victor's hand traced the edge of the photograph with a gentleness that made Elena's chest ache. "Catherine got involved with someone in my world, a competitor who thought he could use her to get to me. When I didn't back down, when I wouldn't cede territory to keep her safe." He stopped, swallowing hard. "They killed her. Made it look like a car accident. Daniel was in the back seat. He was 4 years old." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. "Victor, I'm so sorry." "I hunted down everyone involved," Victor continued, his voice taking on a flat, emotionless quality that was somehow worse than grief. "It took me 2 years, but I found them all. And I made sure they understood what they'd taken from me before I ended them." "Is that when you became—" Elena didn't know how to finish the sentence. "A monster," Victor supplied. "No, I was already in this life. But that's when I stopped pretending there were lines I wouldn't cross. When I stopped believing that caring about people was anything other than a fatal weakness." He looked up at her then, and Elena saw the truth written in every line of his face. "And then I met you," he said, "and I broke every rule I'd made for myself. I let myself care. Let myself hope that maybe I could have something normal, something good, even while living in this world. And then you saw what I really was, and you ran, just like I knew you would, just like everyone does eventually." "I didn't run because you're a monster," Elena said, moving closer. "I ran because I was afraid. Of you, yes, but also of myself. Of how much I'd ignored because it was easier than facing the truth." "And now," Victor asked, "now that you know the whole truth, that I'm not just a criminal, but a man who's destroyed everyone he's ever loved?" Elena looked at the photograph again, at Catherine's bright smile and Daniel's serious little face. She thought about Alexander sleeping in the next room, blissfully unaware of the complicated legacy he'd been born into. "Now I think you've been punishing yourself for 8 years for something that wasn't your fault," she said. "Catherine made her own choices. She knew the risks of your world. And what happened to her and Daniel was evil, but it wasn't because you loved them. It was because someone else chose to be cruel. If I hadn't been in this life, then you would have been someone else entirely," Elena interrupted. "And maybe Catherine would still be alive, or maybe she'd have died in some other way. We can't know. All we can know is what we do with the life we have right now." Victor stood, moving to the window that overlooked the dark valley. "When you ran, when you disappeared, I told myself I wouldn't make the same mistake, that I'd let you go, that trying to hold on to you would only end the same way holding on to Catherine did." "But you didn't let me go," Elena said. "No," he turned to face her, "because the thought of Alexander growing up without me, without ever knowing I tried, that was worse than any danger. Even if it meant putting you both at risk, even if it meant you'd hate me, I had to try." Elena crossed the distance between them, standing close enough to see the exhaustion etched into his features, the weight of 8 years of grief and guilt. "I don't hate you," she said. "I've tried to. It would make this so much easier. But I can't. Because underneath all the terrible things you've done, all the violence and the control, there's a man who built a nursery with forest murals because he remembered which photos made me smile. Who watches our son sleep through a camera feed because 9 months of not knowing left scars that won't heal. Who negotiated with his enemy instead of going to war because he knew war would put us in danger." "Elena, I'm not finished." She took a breath. "You said family is a weakness, a liability, something that will get us killed. But I think you're wrong. I think family is the only thing that makes any of this worth surviving. And I think if we're going to do this, really do this, not just coexist but actually build something, then we need to stop pretending." "Pretending what?" "That this is just a partnership. That we're just co-parents living in the same house out of necessity." Elena's hands were shaking, but she forced herself to continue. "Because that's not what this is anymore. Not for me. And I don't think it is for you either." Victor stared at her, something vulnerable and terrified flickering across his face. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I love you." The words came out steadier than Elena expected. Not the version of you I built in my head when we were in Los Angeles. The real you. The one who's killed people and made terrible choices and carries grief like a second skeleton. I love you anyway, and I'm tired of pretending I don't. The silence that followed felt endless. Victor's expression shifted through shock, disbelief, something that might have been hope before settling on a kind of careful stillness. You can't, he said finally. You can't love me. You saw what I am, what I do. I did. I do. And I love you anyway. Elena reached up and cupped his face in her hands, feeling the rough stubble of his jaw, the warmth of his skin. I know that makes me foolish. I know it probably makes me broken in some fundamental way, but it's true. Elena, if you do this, if we do this, there's no going back. You'll be tied to me in every way that matters, not just as Alexander's mother, as my partner, my everything. And that target on my back, it becomes yours too. It already is mine, Olun, Elena pointed out. Chen proved that. The FBI proved that. The second I got pregnant with your child, I became part of your world whether I wanted to or not. The only question is whether we face it together or keep pretending we're just two people sharing a house. Victor's hands came up to cover hers, his eyes searching her face as if trying to find the trick, the angle, the reason she was saying this. I don't deserve you, he said quietly. Probably not, but you have me anyway. Elena smiled, and it felt like the first genuine smile she'd managed in months. So what do we do about it? Victor pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her with a desperation that made her breath catch. His face buried in her hair, and she felt him shaking. I love you, he said, the words muffled against her shoulder. I've loved you since the first time you told me I was wrong about something and didn't back down when I argued. I loved you when you ran from me. I loved you through every day you were gone, every night I checked that you were safe, every moment I thought I'd lost you forever. Elena held him tighter, feeling the years of walls crumbling between them. We're going to screw this up, she said. We're going to fight. We're going to disagree about how to raise Alexander. We're going to have moments where we drive each other crazy. Probably, Victor agreed. And there will always be threats. Always someone trying to use us against each other. Yes. But we face it together. No more secrets. No more you making decisions to protect me without telling me. We're partners in everything. Victor pulled back just enough to look at her, his hands framing her face. Partners in everything, he agreed, starting with this. He kissed her, and it felt like coming home and stepping off a cliff at the same time. Elena had kissed him before, in the early days of their relationship when she'd thought he was just a businessman with mysterious hours. But this was different. This was kissing him with full knowledge of who he was, what he'd done, and choosing him anyway. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Victor rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, he said. Elena laughed, the sound startled and breathless. What? Marry me. Not because of Alexander, not because it makes you safer, because I want to spend whatever time I have left on this earth legally bound to you in every way possible. That's possibly the least romantic proposal I've ever heard. I'm not a romantic man, Victor said. I'm a criminal who fell in love with someone far too good for him and got impossibly lucky when she loved him back. So marry me, Elena. Let me try to be the man you deserve. Elena thought about everything that had brought them to this moment. The rain-soaked alley, the months of running, the emergency delivery in a blizzard, the photograph on the changing table, the meeting with Chen, all the fear and anger and impossible choices that had led to her standing in Victor's arms, being asked to tie herself to him permanently. Yes, she said, but I have conditions. Victor smiled, and it transformed his entire face. Of course you do. First, I plan the wedding, small, private, just us and the people we actually care about. Agreed. Second, we tell Alexander the truth when he's old enough. About who you are, what you do. We don't lie to him and we don't sugarcoat it. Agreed. And third, Elena paused, working up the courage for what she was about to ask. We find a way out, eventually. Not today, not tomorrow. But we work toward a future where Alexander doesn't have to grow up surrounded by violence, where we can be a normal family. Victor's expression grew serious. Elena, leaving this life isn't like quitting a job. The people I've worked with, the enemies I've made, they don't just let you walk away. I know, but you're smart, you're connected. If anyone can find a way to build a legitimate business and transition out, it's you. Elena held his gaze. I'm not asking you to do it overnight. I'm asking you to try. For Alexander. For us. Victor was quiet for a long moment, and Elena could see him thinking through the logistics, the risks, the near impossibility of what she was asking. It would take years, he said finally, and it would be dangerous, more dangerous than staying. I know. People would see it as weakness. They'd try to take advantage during the transition. I know. And there's no guarantee it would work. I know. Elena's hands tightened on his arms. But I need to believe we're working towards something better. That Alexander won't have to make the same choices you did. Can you give me that? Victor looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I can try. But Elena, you have to understand, if it comes down to your safety or a clean exit, I'm choosing your safety every time. Then we'll just have to make sure it doesn't come down to that choice. Elena kissed him again, sealing the promise between them. They were married 3 weeks later in the living room of the Wyoming house, with only Margaret, Dr. Roth, and Victor's lawyer as witnesses. Alexander slept through most of the ceremony in Margaret's arms, waking only when the officiant pronounced them husband and wife. Elena wore a simple ivory dress she'd ordered online. Victor wore the same suit he'd worn to meet with Chen, though he'd bought a new tie for the occasion. There were no flowers, no grand gestures, no pretense that this was anything other than what it was. Two people choosing each other despite every logical reason not to. When the officiant asked if they had rings, Victor produced 2 simple gold bands. He slipped one on Elena's finger, and she saw her hands were shaking as she did the same for him. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the officiant said, and Victor kissed her while Margaret sniffled and Dr. Roth smiled and the lawyer pretended to check his phone to give them a moment of privacy. The reception was pizza delivered from the nearest town, and champagne Victor had been saving for an occasion he'd thought would never come. They ate and toasted, and Margaret told embarrassing stories about both of them while Alexander gurgled contentedly in his bassinet. It was small and imperfect and more real than anything Elena had ever experienced. That night, after everyone had left and Alexander was asleep in his crib, Elena and Victor lay tangled together in a bed they'd finally agreed to share. How do you feel? Victor asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. Terrified, Elena admitted, and happy. Is that possible? To be both at once? I think it might be the only way to feel in our situation. Victor pressed a kiss to her forehead. But we'll figure it out. Together. Together, Elena agreed. The months that followed were far from easy. Victor began the slow, delicate process of extracting himself from the more dangerous aspects of his business. He sold off operations that couldn't be legitimized, invested in companies that could withstand legal scrutiny, and started building relationships with people who operated above board. It was slow work, painstaking, and dangerous, just as he'd warned. Twice, people tried to take advantage of what they saw as Victor's weakness. Once, someone attempted to breach the security perimeter again, though this time Sarah caught them before they got within 100 yards of the house. But progress was progress. By the time Alexander turned 1 year old, taking his first wobbly steps across the living room floor, Victor's legitimate business interests outweighed his criminal ones for the first time in his adult life. The FBI investigation stalled. Without fresh evidence and with their key witnesses going silent, the case gradually lost momentum. The prosecutor moved on to easier targets. The surveillance ended. Chen honored their agreement, staying in his territory while Victor stayed in his. They'd never be friends, but they'd found a way to coexist. And slowly, impossibly, Elena and Victor built the family they'd both thought was beyond their reach. They had their fights. Spectacular ones sometimes, usually about Victor's tendency to make unilateral decisions when he thought Elena was in danger. She'd storm off to the guest room and he'd give her an hour before showing up with apologies and promises to do better. They had their compromises. Elena accepted that security would always be present. Victor accepted that she wouldn't be controlled or coddled, and they had their moments of grace. Alexander's first word was Dada, and Victor cried. Elena taught Alexander to love books, reading to him every night before bed. They celebrated holidays with Margaret and Dr. Roth, building chosen family from the people who'd helped them survive. On Alexander's second birthday, Elena found Victor in the nursery that wasn't a nursery anymore, but a toddler's room with a big boy bed and walls covered in hand-drawn pictures. "I've been thinking," Victor said, not looking up from where he was organizing stuffed animals. "Dangerous," Elena teased, "about the future, about what comes next." He turned to face her. "My lawyer thinks we're about 18 months from being completely clean. All legal holdings, all legitimate income. We could move then, somewhere less isolated. Give Alexander other kids to play with. Give you a life that doesn't revolve around security protocols." Elena's heart leapt. "Really? You mean it?" "I do. But Elena, even when we're legitimate, there will always be people who remember what I was, who might try to use that against us. We'll never be completely safe." "No one is completely safe," Elena said, moving into his arms. "But we'll be safer than we are now, and we'll be together. That's enough." "Is it?" Victor asked. "Enough for you? After everything you've sacrificed?" Elena thought about the question seriously, about the life she'd imagined for herself before she met Victor, the career, the apartment in a safe neighborhood, the uncomplicated partner who worked normal hours and didn't have enemies or secrets. That life was gone. Had been gone since the moment she stepped into that rain-soaked alley and saw who Victor really was. But the life she had now, complicated and imperfect as it was, held things that imagined life never could. A son who looked at her like she hung the moon, a husband who'd literally built her a fortress to keep her safe, a purpose that went beyond climbing corporate ladders. "It's more than enough," she said. "It's everything." Victor pulled her close, and they stood together in their son's room, planning for a future that had once seemed impossible. Alexander burst into the room at that moment, his small legs carrying him at top speed, a stuffed elephant clutched in one chubby fist. "Mama, Dada, park, go, park!" he demanded with the absolute certainty of a 2-year-old who knew what he wanted. Elena laughed, scooping him up. "It's almost dinner time, baby. Maybe after?" "Now," Alexander insisted. Victor met Elena's eyes over their son's head, and something passed between them, understanding, affection, the shared exhaustion and joy of parenting a determined toddler. 15 minutes at the park, Victor said. "Then dinner. Deal?" "Deal!" Alexander shouted, squirming to be put down so he could run to get his shoes. As they bundled Alexander into his coat and headed outside, Elena felt something settle in her chest. Not quite peace. She wasn't sure people like them ever got peace. But something close. Contentment, maybe. Acceptance. She'd run from Victor once, run from the truth of who he was and what that meant for her life. But running hadn't saved her. It had only delayed the inevitable. Love had saved her. Messy, complicated, often frustrating love that refused to fit into neat categories or follow logical rules. She loved a man who'd killed people, who'd built an empire on activities that existed in legal gray areas at best, who'd threatened and manipulated to get what he wanted. But she also loved a man who'd remembered which photos made her smile and used them to paint murals in their son's nursery, who'd sat in a hospital waiting room for 2 days because he couldn't bear to leave while she recovered, who was actively dismantling the life he'd built because she'd asked him to give their son something better. People weren't simple. Love wasn't simple. And maybe that was okay. At the park, really just a cleared area with some playground equipment Thomas had installed last summer, Alexander ran straight for the swings. "Push!" he demanded, and Victor lifted him into the child seat, pushing gently while Alexander shrieked with delight. Elena sat on a nearby bench, watching her husband and son play in the fading afternoon light. The security cameras were hidden in the trees. The perimeter sensors would alert them to any approaching vehicles. And somewhere in the house, Sarah and Thomas were monitoring feeds and ensuring that this small moment of normalcy stayed safe. But for now, in this moment, they were just a family. Victor caught her eye and smiled, And Elena smiled back, thinking about weddings and promises and futures that looked nothing like what they'd planned but somehow turned out right anyway. "Higher, Dada! Higher!" Alexander shouted, and Victor obliged, his laughter mixing with their son's. Elena pulled out her phone and took a picture, her boys silhouetted against the Wyoming sky, caught in a moment of pure joy. She'd add it to the album she'd been keeping, the one that told the story of how they'd built this impossible life, how fear had turned to trust, how running had turned to staying, how survival had turned to love. It wasn't the story she would have written for herself. But sitting on that bench, watching the two people she loved most in the world, Elena couldn't imagine any other ending. This was her life, her family, her choice, and she'd choose it again, every single time. Alexander's delighted screams echoed across the valley as Victor pushed him higher, and Elena closed her eyes, letting the sound of her son's laughter wash over her like a benediction. They'd made it. Against all odds, through all the fear and violence and impossible choices, they'd made it to the other side. And whatever came next, they'd face it together, just as they'd promised, just as they'd chosen, forever.